Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Aaron Leader. I serve the partnerships division here at Pavilion. And today we're joined by DealHub. We're discussing the future of the revenue stack, and we're going to be picking apart a survey we ran within the community earlier this year. The findings are available on our resources page if you'd like to check it out. But pleased to introduce and invite Gideon Thomas. He's the Chief Marketing Officer over at DealHub.io. He leads the company's GTM strategy. He's the contributing member of the Ford's Communication Council and Pavilion and a host of the acclaimed RevAmp podcast by DealHub. He's coming from a culturally rich life where he's lived in the US, UK, Africa, and Israel, all of which he serves his passion for people and building communities. Gideon, thank you for joining us today. Excited to dig in.
Thank you, Aaron. Pleasure to be back here discussing this topic with you again. I know it's something that you always want to be at the forefront of over there at the Pavilion community. And as a consequence of doing this benchmark report together, there were some really unique and interesting insights for us to discuss here today. So let's jump in and get into this. So first of all, I just want you to get like an overview of what we'll get from this this time together here today. So here are the key 3 takeaway areas that I believe that we're going to learn together and take from this situation. So what to look for today when managing your revenue stack, how to use the revenue stack to onboard and scale your sales team, managing and streamlining discount approvals to win more revenue. So we're going to take like a top-down approach to the whole revenue stack. And actually, even before we get into the next slide, I'm going to ask a question that was asked on LinkedIn just a couple of days ago in the lead into this, is what is the difference between a sales stack and a revenue stack? And if I was to answer that succinctly, I would say a sales stack is something that helps you manage your sales process all the way up to close winning a deal, and a revenue stack does all of that and goes even a step beyond that into helping you managing your revenue execution with maybe your customer base, which might include, you know, your renewals and your expansions, or even maybe your upsells, and really takes a holistic 360 view of revenue execution anywhere across your customer life cycle. So that's the nuance right now, is, you know, the conversation has gone beyond sales and to a holistic view of revenue. So let's jump into the next slide here. I found this fascinating, and I decided to kind of quote something from McKinsey so that, you know, you would know it was nice and objective here. So that first statistic on the left-hand side, 70% of buyers don't want to ever interact with sales reps in person post-COVID-19. So what we've seen over the last 2 years is this whole digital transformation of sales, and mostly at this stage right now, it's being buyer-led, and it's become so convenient and comfortable for buyers that they want to actually continue it, presumably because it's maybe more convenient for them, more efficient for them, more time effective for them, and it's given more power to them. You know, in addition to that, 90% of B2B decision makers expect remote to stick around for the long run. At least there will be a hybrid mode, if nothing else, but we will always have enabled remote sales teams from this point onwards. And I think as much as anything else, there's been so many organizations that have now kind of democratized their sales organization to not all be focused around an office space, but to be able to work from anywhere. With that being said, remote sales must be a thing to hang on to. And thirdly, over here, 14% more revenue attributed to email communication during COVID as opposed to in-person communication has gone down. So people are using, I wouldn't even say the modern tools, but at least the digital tools to help them push the deals forward. So that's a little, go ahead.
One question on this one. So internally at DealHub, have you seen your deal cycles shorten or lengthen over this period?
We've seen them shorten. We've seen appetite increase over the past couple of years. Appetite was already good, but we just see the fact, I mean, in terms of DealHub, I haven't really said who or what we are yet, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but DealHub is essentially a platform that enables remote sales organizations. So demand for that has increased, you know, as a consequence of COVID. And because the market is better informed to a larger degree, then yes, sales cycle has been reduced because people are better informed and they know they have a burning need. But I will come back to that later. That's a good question.
Okay. Cool.
Let's check out a little bit of the challenge, and this frames it well. Is I've just said to you that DealHub sales cycle has actually shortened and demand for remote sales tools has increased. And in the context of this this webinar, the 2021 state of the revenue stack looks at first glance overwhelming. Fair to say there, Aaron. There are a lot of different tools throughout the whole cycle right now for people to home in on select. And I think you'll have seen this with the acquisitions that have happened in the last 2 years and some of the product kind of rollouts and various major, and the major movers in the market have all worked towards consolidation of the revenue stack. So I just, want to say that, the first thing for us to be aware of is amongst all the busyness is the need for simplicity. Let's move on to the next slide together. So how are companies managing their revenue stack? So first of all, from the report that we did with your organization and your community, we saw from the feedback that in 2022, in terms of prioritization of revenue stack budget, 55% of the audience said that their spending on software and technology will increase in 2022. Actually, this one was, according to G2 Crowd, who is, again, another credible source of software buying habits and intent. So we're seeing demand increase. We've definitely not had a saturated market. 89% of the people that we surveyed together with you reported that they are currently using 1 to 10 sales tools. So that's not to say that a lot of those companies were young or immature. That was just to say that a lot of those companies still haven't kind of peaked or maxed out their stack potential. They very much have taken early or first steps. And then thirdly, in terms of budget, currently the average spend for that audience was around $1,627 per rep on sales tools.
So 1 second on this one. So which part of the stack have you seen significant budget growth?
Well, actually, we're going to look at it later on. So usually the stack works top down. From people tend to lean in, first of all, to the most simplistic go-to-market additions. Like, for example, after you've got your CRM in place, you're adding something like a sales proposal tool. So that you can just send out something that is perhaps on brand and everything's collaborated in a lot faster than doing it manually. I remember speaking to frontline users a year or two ago, and they were spending like an hour and a half to create a custom proposal. And of course, once you add a software or automation software in to do that kind of task, you can boil it down into something which is customized and branded in less than 10 minutes easily. So definitely easier tools and high volume tools is your first step. And then as the company matures, they realize that the projects they saw as digital transformation projects, like maybe CPQ or contract management, become unavoidable because you realize that you're giving, we'll get into this later, but you're giving away so much money, so much margins per se, that you realize that it doesn't need to be something that you shy away from. It actually eventually becomes a physical necessity. But we'll unpack that in a moment. Let's take a look at the next slide down. So 5 things to consider when you're building your revenue stack. What are your company's goals? Of course. How will this new tool connect with your current stack? So it's not just about, I've seen this really shiny, flashy, awesome piece of software, but what do I have already? And kind of doing that needs analysis match. Third, what do you have time to implement and manage? So there's obviously the hidden cost of implementation time, the digital transformation project, and the resources that you have in terms of the headcount or the partnerships or whatever you need to do that piece. Obviously, people don't like to do a heavy lift if they can avoid it. And what do your peers use and why do they like it? So that kind of social feedback, other revenue operations leaders, sales ops leaders, what is the latest and greatest in terms of the tools they're adding value to their life and making their lives easier? And fifth, how will your new tool be adopted by your sales organization? I always like to talk about this point more than anything else, just because it's not about implementation. That's not the goal or the mark of approval. It's has it been fully adopted by your organization? If not, then it's ROI negative. If you've done a major implementation and people don't adopt it, it hasn't made a difference. So obviously when the C-levels, the CROs, CFOs are considering a tool, the endpoint shouldn't be just about the feature functions and implementation. It should be likeliness or achievement of 100% sales team and sales org adoption. So in the first point there, what are your company goals? So of course, when you think about the top of the pipe, you're thinking about growing leads. Of course, you want to reduce overhead costs. So sometimes that's about consolidating technologies so that you're kind of really using everything to its full potential. Expanding into new markets to give you obviously a wider market footprint, and then creating new products, and more than that, the ability to bring those new products to market is super important. And that's again where solutions like CPQ, configured price quotation, will allow you to price those accordingly. All of these roll up to, of course, grow revenue. So I've spoken to quite a few sales operations and revenue operations leaders, of course, over the recent years, and one of the consistent pieces of feedback that I received for them is the need to achieve horizontal connectivity. That's the ability to get your existing technologies, whether that be CPQ or CLM or whatever it may be, to connect to anything you might be thinking about adding. So when I think of vertical connectivity, I think about your sales tool to your CRM, as you can see here on the diagram. When I think horizontally, it's more like your sales tool to your sales tool, or your sales tool to obviously your revenue stack tools like CPQ to subscription management being a classic example of that. Now let's really kind of open the can of worms here. So what are the top ranked barriers to purchasing revenue solutions? So I don't know if this is surprising to you or not, but here we go with onboarding complexity, obviously being the highest achiever here with 28% of the people that we surveyed saying that that was their number one barrier to purchasing. If I was to imagine why, I would guess that once you kind of get from 10 to 25 technologies, it's really hard for you to be a master of all and to continue to be a master of all. Which means you're therefore, if you're not a master of all, you're going to be depending on either the solution provider or a third party kind of service provider to do the implementation for you. And that's where it starts to get a little bit more scary, is you no longer have control within your own hands. You're dependent on somebody else. And you really have to do a lot of due diligence and take your best measured step as to managing the risk of failure. Obviously, with expectations being so high in the industry, the ability to have a few failed projects is definitely not on anybody's radar right now. So managing that onboarding complexity is definitely of high importance.
1 second on that one, just in terms of comparing it to cost being the number one barrier of entry.
Yep.
Do you feel, sorry if this is a closed question, maybe I should frame it as like, how do you feel this has changed comparing cost and onboarding complexity of like 2021 versus 2020 or 2019?
So to be fair to you, I don't have data year on year to give you a fact-based answer. Yeah. I can give you a perception-based answer from what I'm seeing is, because there are so many more technologies in the marketplace right now. When there was few, it was more of a cost side-by-side comparison, and now there's the stack. The marketplace of what's available to you has become kind of much more exponential. I think the movement has moved away from costing to there's just so much great innovation, and it has so many capabilities, and you don't want to just purchase it, but you want to make sure that you use it to its full potential. So again, it's no longer about the price point or the initial cost of ownership. It's really about the execution of, have I deployed it? Have I used as close to its full potential as possible? Am I avoiding duplication between various purchases, where they overlap, and I'm doing a bit of the same thing with more than one tool? And with all of these cool new features, am I using them all, and am I making it easy for my sales organization to use them all without this being an extra layer of admin in the day? Because again, your end user in this situation is your sales organization. It's not your CFO, your CRO, your head of sales ops, rev ops. All the way down. If the sales team failed to adopt and use it, you've really failed to serve your target audience. And what does that mean to me? That means they should be consulted in the purchasing cycle, and typically they're not. So a glimpse inside our revenue stack, we always try to be transparent and give you a little bit of feedback as to some of the tools that we're using. So, we use HubSpot for marketing automation, and then there's a lot of kind of insights into the lead journey, the buyer journey there. Scheduling tools, Chili Piper, make that automated process a lot quicker, a lot smoother, so the buyer can choose the time that suits them. Outreach.io, well known to many people, allows you to run cadences and to A/B test subject lines and really be attuned to the buyer behaviors there of the leads that we're reaching out to. Zoom, we're using Zoom right now for this call, and it's become the staple diet right here in terms of bridging distance. In terms of next step down, which is the ability to execute on the opportunity from opportunity to close, then we use, of course, our own products. We have the Deal Room product, which we haven't spoken much about yet, but essentially what is that? That's a micro website between buyer and seller that we create from the CRM as the starting point, with everything needed to close the deal in one location, including embedded in that is the CPQ, the configured price quote solution, the contract management, the e-signature, the subscription management if it's repeat business, and any other supporting sales collateral that is needed. For example, customer case studies or embedded video, and you name it. So definitely we tend to use our own tools and technology within our process for good reason. Moving forward, how will your new tool be adopted by your sales organization? So I've already kind of drummed that message home. Is your sales users are really important. They should have a voice in the process, and here's a little visualization of that to help us out. So fluid change management. That sounds like jargon straight off the bat. So fluid change management. What does that mean? So that really means it shouldn't be a heavy lift. The phases should be easy to articulate and adopt. There definitely should be advocacy from your sales org at a really early stage, that they own the change and champion the change and even test and trial the change before you roll it out in full. Once you've used them as the kind of the pilot group, then of course it's a great idea to create a guided selling playbook or something of that nature to basically standardize the best practice from your leaders to other team members, so that you can really ramp and accelerate the onboarding of all the additional team members. Make the whole process intuitive for sales reps. So connect it wherever possible, standardize it, reduce the amount of logins, make it all work from kind of one workstation, and then measure and get feedback on the success of all of this. And obviously there's two ways that you can measure. One is through kind of interviews and verbal feedback, and the other is, of course, the data, to see the impact on productivity, efficiency, win rates, response times, and many of the other latencies that can be measured. Again, dipping back into our data here. Quick wins come first. Consider the next step to scale. So this kind of goes back to your earlier question of which tools are largely adopted first, and we see here the actual data from the survey. Sales proposal being the number one tool, document generation number two, CPQ then being number third. So that's the configured price quotation. Then we get into subscription management. I would guess that subscription management has kind of climbed its way up the ladder, because you've seen over the last 2 years, so many companies have executed their revenue through selling to existing customers. I think there was a statistic that I heard in year one of COVID where something like 70% of revenue during that year would come from existing customers. So a lot of companies found it easier to sell into existing customers when kind of budget for new business had been frozen during COVID. And with that in mind, I still think the subscription economy there is a key piece for a lot of companies that want to have a deeper footprint and become more sticky in their customer install base. The business case for using a CPQ now. What do I mean by that? So first of all, CPQ traditionally used to be seen as a huge digital transformation project, which would take 15 months to install, and therefore, because it was such perceived as a big project, was often procrastinated or put off. But actually, as we drill down into the numbers here, the first thing that we see is that SMBs send sales proposals faster with a CPQ. So what am I saying here? I showed you on the previous slide that sales proposals were kind of the first step in rolling out the stack. And we're seeing that those actual sales proposals that have already been invested in are accelerated or sent faster when a CPQ is in place. And you can kind of see the impact of that right the way throughout here of with a CPQ, often outperforming without, and it becomes really profound when we get into that 1 to 4 hour range.
Yeah, love this slide. This is a dynamic visual for this point.
Very cool. I'm going to keep going because we've got some more good stuff here. But just before we go to the next slide, I wanted to say that 95% with a CPQ send out within an hour compared to only 56% of those without a CPQ. I'll say that again because I kind of stuttered over it. 95% with a CPQ send out within an hour compared to 56% of those without a CPQ. So a real contrast right there. So when we compare the SMB story for CPQ versus the enterprise and the motion to scale up to enterprise, I think one of the interesting data insights here is, of course, 90% of enterprise companies with the CPQ send out their proposal within 4 hours, compared to only 43% of those without the CPQ. So I couldn't imagine being in the 43% that are sending out in over 4 hours. I would definitely want to be going home early to my family and doing a lot of other stuff with my time. But it does seem to be very true that putting the two together and automating it does save a lot of time. And especially kind of the takeaway from that is the bigger you get, the more admin involved for you, which makes sense. Recognizing the top 5 pricing blind spots. Number 1, understanding margins. 2, discount approval workflow. 3, competitive pricing. 4, optimal price points, finding the optimal price point. And 5, pricing for services. All of these are absolutely super valuable. I can understand why they would be blind spots, but let's dig in and understand a little bit more about margins and why they are, in fact, the top blind spot. So 3 consequences to the sales organization for not understanding margins. First of all, reps discounts are too large. So again, without the margin approval workflows, reps will naturally give away more margin than they should, with the exception of Aaron. You know, you're a great sales rep, and you're definitely going to stick to the rule book. But a lot of those guys out there are just going to kind of leave their senses to try and close the quarter. Next, reps don't know their optimal discounts. So it might be, you know, I've seen it from our data in the past, is that sometimes people are discounting above a threshold that leads to an increased win rate. Sometimes people are just giving away profitability with no upside. You know, it could have closed at 20%, but they discounted it to 25%. It still would have closed at 20%, but they hadn't read or looked into the data to really know that. Third, sales teams are not focused on profitability. So this is the biggest pain for organizations, is most sales reps are focused on quota achievement, not on profitability. So there is a inherent difference between the priorities of a sales organization versus the business itself. Next, as we move forward, there is the need to democratize margin best practices. So really, what does that mouthful mean to us, Aaron? And really what it says is this, and it's easiest as a side-by-side comparison, that a lot of you know, looking in descending order from most senior in terms of who is the least confident about margin best practice, you can see that the C-levels are the most confident on the left-hand side, at 0% of them having any kind of blind spots or second guesses or doubts. And all the way down to the manager and even the sales reps there being the most unclear about accurate and best practice on margins. Okay, so that's quite concerning, that as we get lower down to the people that are actually sending out the quotes or managing the process of sending out the quotes, there's a lot more hesitation. And then we compare that to the level of autonomy that people have to go and execute that. So one is confidence and the other is control, like the ability to go and execute that with relatively low level of accountability. And we see that as it kind of moves down the chart there on the right hand side in the red, that the sales reps have a lot of autonomy. Also, the managers do too as well. So you have a lot of freedom to go and execute those quotes without strict margin best practices to people who, the same people on the left, who also are really unclear. Does that make sense as to why that's so important? Isn't clear and has a lot of autonomy to go and execute it. So there's great opportunity there for a company not to execute margin best practices well.
And I was wondering, like, on your end, what about this data point was most surprising?
I mean, the managers, in terms of their confidence, those guys are the ones that have, received the briefs or the direction from the C levels and the executive team above them. So they have the whole spotlight, they have the pressure, they have the responsibility for the sales reps, and they clearly are not confident whatsoever. So that's something that I would want to address as a priority. And of course, the way that we do address these things as a priority is to put in approval workflow best practices, so those managers don't have to commit everything to memory. They are guided through the process, and anytime margins exceed certain thresholds, there is a C level there to back them up in a moment.
Thank you.
Second blind spot, and probably the one that we'll spend a little bit of time on today, is discount approval workflow. So I've just kind of led into it a second ago, and now we'll just going to unpack that a little bit more. How do sales teams do discount approvals today? There really is only three options. So, if you're working in Microsoft or in Excel or those kind of traditional manual processes, then there just isn't really a proven approval workflow process. Best case scenario, when you're sitting in the office, you could ask your colleague. Now everything is remote. That's going to be an extreme bottleneck to go and get those approval processes via email and et cetera. Second option, so the first option is just no approval process, and that really does exist. The second is manual approval process, which is chasing team members to actually give you what you need. And the worst part about that is when you get to end of quarter and everybody's submitting their end of queue price quotes and all the rest of it to try and close quotes at the same moment. Not all of those approvals will be responded to in time. So that's obviously a challenge. And then the third option, which is obviously the most sensible, is to automate the approval process. And what does that mean? Automating the approval process doesn't mean that you submit something and the system, the software automatically responds to you. It just means that when you submit your discount approval, it's routed to the right person within your organization. It's done electronically, and it will tell them this is what you've asked for, this is what you're approved for, or this is what the recommended margin should be. And it allows that leader to make that approval decision in minutes using comfortable medians or means like responding via your phone or something like that, to make it quick and efficient and remove those bottlenecks. Three problems with manual approval discounting. So we're starting with the basics here. Messaging overload for approvers. You become the problem. Two, because you are the bottleneck, the approval process is slow. Who receives that? I mean, that's about customer experience. Eventually, if I've said, please send me a price quote, I'd like to close with you, and then it takes you 5 or 6 days to turn that around, that is not the kind of positive customer experience that you would want them to have, or would make your brand be remembered for the right reasons. And thirdly, in terms of the top line, potential loss of revenue. So that always hurts when you lose more revenue than you need to. Benefits, flip side of it, benefits of streamlining the discounting process. The exact opposite side of the same coin is leaders only receive approval requests when necessary. So it's prioritization, of course. Approvals are under a fixed threshold, are automatically approved. So that's just saying that not everything needs to be escalated up. You know, if you're under your kind of 8-10% threshold, you can get that approved automatically from the system without actually kind of pushing that further up the food chain. And third, those guardrails are in place to avoid rogue discounting. So that's, you know, sometimes you have that lone wolf who's your kind of bringing the lion's share of the quota, but sometimes they might overstretch the mark and just kind of go beyond a level that makes this profitable for the company. Challenges and solutions around subscription management. So now we're in subscription management. So we've moved beyond just the sales stack into kind of the complete revenue stack story. And the first kind of data point that we want to talk and address together is 75% of companies earn the majority of their revenue from subscriptions. That's worth saying again, 75% of companies earn the majority of their revenue from subscriptions. So kind of repeat business from existing customers is a big piece of the cake these days, and a new business is only a part of that. And that's why you've seen the story shift from just sales tech to revenue tech or stack. And because that is such a big piece of it, it's really important to execute that, you know, using the right tools to automate it. And more than just automate it, you also want to connect it. So you can't execute subscription revenue without knowing what happened in the first place. So you want all of that data to be in your CRM, of course, and you want to know, you know, through using an automated CPQ, what that price point was, what the terms, conditions, commitment, terms of service, whatever, what was originally committed to in the first place, so that your subscription and renewal can be well informed without making yourself look like an idiot in front of your customer. One of the challenges here, of course, is that plan changes complicate the subscription process. So this was ranked actually as the #1 kind of friction point for RevOps and SalesOps leaders, is that on the fly changes to your plans and, you know, your product price books and all the rest of it meant that whatever was true before is now different today. And really the takeaway from this is RevOps and SalesOps leaders are now living in an era where everything needs to be dynamic. They need the ability to make changes to their plans and standardize best practice on the fly, because you need to be responsive to the market, and you need to be responsive to the fact that your competitors are constantly changing their price points as well in fluctuations to the market. So the ability to be dynamic with plan changes is really important in executing a good subscription process. So I kept it light so that, of course, we would have time for questions, and I'd maybe be able to share 1 or 2 more slides with you. But just to summarize everything that we've learned so far from the survey data, of course, we've recognized the ability to move from manual processes to automated, the need to move from siloed solutions to a horizontally connected stack, and thirdly, the need and the necessity to move from just overcoming implementation barriers to actually achieving user adoption. Your sales org actually has to use the tools, and they have to be fit for service, for purpose, I should say. And the best way to do that is to include them in the buying process, or at least in the implementation process, as your champions, and give them a real and credible voice. We saved the best for last. So what is DealHub? How do we play into this wider story? DealHub is a revenue application platform, of course, which basically brings together a number of sales and revenue technologies into one cohesive stack. And actually on the next slide, I'm going to share and show you what the before and after picture looks like for you. So on the left-hand side, just to give you an indication of what the normal day in the life is for a salesperson these days, it's logging in and logging out of several disconnected sales solutions, kind of hacking together, you know, maybe Drive docs, PDFs, Words, you name it, all into something that you need to send over to the customer. It's very labor intensive, very much intensive on administration, not always, of course, on brand. And worst case scenario, the buyer might end up with a string of emails and have to piece that all together into some kind of coherent order to get a full picture as what you're saying yes to. Compare that to what DealHub offers, which is basically one fluid sales motion, which is basically a workflow where once you have that sales opportunity, we're guiding the sales rep right the way through all of the deal execution stages, basically consolidating that into one effective stage, which is a deal room with all of the relevant collateral in there to close the deal and help your new customer to say yes. The inherent advantage of this is, of course, that in that deal room, you can share kind of a one source of truth picture with all of the stakeholder team. So not only your champion, but everybody else can see the same story in the same fashion and reach consensus faster. As we move to the next slide, I think it's really important to recognize why this truly is an innovation and an evolution story. You know, if you compare our customer data, we actually had a look at the aggregate of all of our customers, and we looked at kind of the old way, which was to send things traditionally in the means of PDF, which is of course the least user friendly and very labor intensive, over to kind of the win rates of those using Word, which, you know, you can brand it, you can add logos and do some basic design work there, but it still is perhaps an outdated method of working, to the kind of new deal room methodology, which is a medium which is very much on brand, as mentioned before, bringing everything into one centralized location and reducing, of course, the sales stages. The win rates speak for themselves. So the upside of doing this definitely has an impact on sales organization win rate. It definitely is the new way of selling. It's something that we are proud to bring to market, and of course share a lot more insights and best practice of how this would give you a competitive advantage. So thank you from myself, the team over here at DealHub. We have a fantastic set of data, which we mentioned at the beginning in the benchmark report. Definitely follow the links and see the full document to get some of your hands on some of those insights and relate it to your own situation. And of course, we're here and available for any questions that you may have. Thanks a lot.